Chinedu sat in the dimly lit living room, his eyes fixed on the ticking clock. The rhythmic sound echoed through the quiet house, each tick hammering against his already frayed nerves. His fingers tapped impatiently against the armrest of his chair, a subconscious attempt to ground himself, to keep the storm in his mind at bay. But it was futile. He muttered under his breath, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. It was late, too late. His wife, Eboli, still hadn't returned from work, and it was well past 11. He threw another glance at the small room down the hallway where their twin daughters, Adora and Amarachi, slept. Their soft breathing was the only reassurance he had in this house that no longer felt like a home. Once, it had been a sanctuary. Once, it had been filled with laughter, warmth, and love. But things had changed. Eboli had changed. Lately, she came home late too often. There was always an excuse, overtime, an important meeting, a last-minute errand. But Chinedu wasn't a fool. He had seen the way she smiled at her phone, the hushed conversations that ended abruptly whenever he walked into the room. Gone were the days when she would rush home, eager to share every detail of her day. Now, there was only distance. Cold, unbridgeable. What kind of job keeps a married woman out this late? The thought, venomous and insistent, had nestled itself deep in his mind. At first, he had pushed it away. But as the nights grew longer and lonelier, his suspicions had festered into something ugly. He clenched his jaw. Is she seeing someone else? The idea had taken root weeks ago, but tonight, it felt undeniable. He had done everything for this family. He had worked tirelessly to provide, to build a life for them. And this was how she repaid him. His fingers clenched into fists. No, he needed proof. That was why, a week ago, he had taken matters into his own hands. Under the pretense of combing their daughter's hair, he had plucked a few strands and secretly sent them for a DNA test. It was drastic, he knew that, but his instincts screamed at him to seek the truth. And now, the truth lay in his hands. A sealed envelope. His heart pounded as he tore it open, his breath shallow. His eyes scanned the document, moving past the scientific jargon until he found what he was looking for. Not a biological match. Chinedu's world collapsed. He stared at the words, his mind refusing to process them. It had to be a mistake, a clerical error, but the bold letters burned into his brain, refusing to be ignored. They're not mine. A slow, suffocating rage crawled up his spine. He had bathed them, fed them, carried them on his shoulders, wiped away their tears. He had loved them, and now, what? They were never his to begin with. His vision blurred with fury. Eboli had lied to him, deceived him, made him a fool. The paper crumpled in his grip. His breathing grew ragged as a dark, sinister thought took root in his mind. She would regret this. They all would. That night, Chinedu moved like a shadow through the narrow hallway, his steps eerily silent. His pulse thundered in his ears as he reached the girl's room. The soft glow of the nightlight cast faint shadows across their sleeping forms. He stood there, his expression unreadable, watching them for a long moment before stepping inside and shutting the door softly behind him. "Wake up," he whispered, nudging them both. Adora stirred first, blinking in confusion. "Daddy," she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. "What's wrong?" His voice, when it came, was low and menacing. "Shut up and listen," he snapped. "If either of you says a word about this, I'll kill you both. Do you understand?" Adora's breath hitched. Beside her, Amarachi whimpered, clutching her sister's hand. Terror filled their eyes. That night was the first of many. Each time Eboli worked late, Chinedu would return. Each time, Adora and Amarachi would lie awake, dreading the moment they heard his footsteps approach their door. Weeks turned into months. The torment continued, stretching on endlessly. Adora had always been the braver of the two, but even she was breaking under the weight of fear. One night, after he had finally left their room, she sat up in bed, her body shaking with silent sobs. Amarachi curled up beside her, whispering, "Why is he doing this? What did we do?" Adora clenched her fists. "We have to stop him." "But how?" Amarachi's voice trembled. Adora thought hard. "Mama won't believe us without proof. We have to record him." The next morning, while Chinadu was at work, Adora searched through their mother's drawer and found an old phone. It was out of service, but the voice recorder still worked. That night, when Chinadu entered their room, Adora discreetly pressed record. The device captured everything: the hushed threats, their muffled cries, the horror that unfolded. When he finally left, Adora clutched the phone to her chest. It was their only hope. The next day, when Chinadu left for work, Adora turned to her sister. "We're telling Mama today." Fear flickered across Amarachi's face. "What if he finds out? What if he hurts us? We can't stay silent," Adora said firmly. That evening, when Eboli returned from work, her daughters were waiting for her in the living room. "Mama, we need to talk," Adora said, her voice shaky. Eboli frowned, setting down her bag. "What is it, my loves?" Adora took a deep breath. "It's Daddy. He's been coming into our room at night." Eboli froze. Silence stretched between them. Then Amarachi, unable to hold back her pain, burst into tears. When Adora played the recording, the truth was undeniable. Eboli's hands flew to her mouth. No, this can't be. But it was, and she knew what she had to do. That night, when Chinadu walked through the door, Eboli was waiting. "How could you?" she screamed, shoving the phone in his face. Chinadu's face darkened. "You want to know why?" His voice was eerily calm. "Because they're not mine, Eboli. And you knew it." Eboli's world spun. "What are you talking about?" Chinadu threw the crumpled DNA results at her. "Read it. Those girls aren't mine. You betrayed me." Eboli's hands shook. "Chinadu, please, let me explain." But he wasn't listening. "As for the man who did this to me, I'll deal with him myself." That night, Chinadu drove to Abina's house, a pistol resting in his pocket. When the door opened, the gunshot rang out. The next morning, police arrived at Chinadu's home. He was arrested for murder. But that wasn't the only crime he would be charged with. Eboli handed the recordings to the authorities. In court, the evidence was overwhelming. The judge's verdict was swift. Guilty on all counts. Chinadu was sentenced to life imprisonment. Eboli held her daughters close. Justice had been served, but the scars remained, and now, they would begin the long journey of healing.